Between 1950 and 1959, American mothers perfected 60 heirloom meals that fed entire families around dinner tables every single night. These weren't fancy restaurant creations requiring culinary school training. They were meatloaf, casseroles, and deviled eggs made with ground beef. Women earned reputations as excellent homemakers when their families ate everything without complaining and asked what's for dinner tomorrow. Then TV dinners arrived, fast food chains took over, and homemade family meals vanished completely. Tonight, we're remembering all 60 forgotten heirloom meals from 1950s American kitchen history. Deviled eggs. Every grandmother had her own deviled egg recipe written on a stained index card tucked inside her recipe box. The dish originated in ancient Rome, but American grandmothers perfected it in the 1950s. Hard-boiled eggs were halved, yolks scooped out and mashed with mayonnaise, yellow mustard, a splash of white vinegar, salt, and black pepper. The creamy mixture was spooned back into the egg whites, then topped with a dusting of paprika. Grandmothers made dozens at a time for bridge club meetings, church socials, and Sunday dinners. The eggs were always served on special glass platters reserved only for this purpose. Each family had their own variation. Some added sweet pickle relish, others used Worcestershire sauce, and a few mixed in finely minced onion. The recipe was never written down completely because measurements were done by sight and taste. Mothers learned by watching their mothers, and daughters learned the same way. By the 1990s, pre-made deviled egg filling appeared in grocery stores, and the homemade tradition faded. Younger generations bought plastic deviled egg carriers but never learned the family recipe. The heirloom dish that once appeared at every gathering slowly disappeared from tables. Today, most people have never tasted a deviled egg made from their grandmother's actual recipe. Sausage Balls church cookbooks from the 1950s all contained the same 3-ingredient recipe for sausage balls. Grandmothers mixed 1 pound of ground beef sausage with 2 cups of shredded sharp cheddar cheese and 2 cups of Biscuit baking mix. The ingredients were combined by hand until a sticky dough formed, then rolled into 1-inch balls and placed on ungreased baking sheets. They baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes until golden brown and crispy on the outside. The finished sausage balls were piled onto serving platters and served warm or at room temperature. Every grandmother made them for Christmas morning breakfast, church potlucks, and holiday parties. The recipe was so simple that no measurements were needed. Women made them from memory after the first time. Some families added a dash of garlic powder, others mixed in cayenne pepper for spice, and a few used hot sausage for extra flavor. The dish was cheap, filling, and always disappeared quickly. Mothers taught daughters how to roll the balls evenly and judge the perfect baking time. By the 2000s, frozen pre-made sausage balls appeared in grocery stores, and the homemade tradition ended. Younger generations bought them frozen and never learned to make the dough from scratch. The heirloom recipe that once fed entire congregations disappeared from modern kitchens. French onion dip, before ranch dressing, took over American tables. French onion dip was the king of all party dips. Grandmothers made it by mixing 1 packet of Lipton onion soup mix with 2 cups of sour cream and a squeeze of lemon juice. The mixture was stirred together and refrigerated for at least 2 hours, so the dried onions could rehydrate and the flavors could blend. It was served in a crystal bowl surrounded by rippled potato chips, preferably Ruffles brand, because their ridges held more dip. The dish appeared at every family gathering, football party, and neighborhood cookout throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Grandmothers always made it the night before, so it would be perfectly chilled and flavorful. Some women added a splash of Worcestershire sauce. Others mixed in finely chopped fresh chives, and a few stirred in crumbled bacon for extra richness. The dip was so popular that the bowl was always scraped clean, and guests would use broken chips to get every last bit. Mothers learned the recipe simply by watching their mothers mix it together. No written instructions needed. By the 2000s, grocery stores sold pre-made French onion dip in plastic containers, and fewer women made it from scratch. Daughters grew up buying it ready-made and never learned the proper sour cream consistency or the importance of refrigeration time. The heirloom dip that once defined casual entertaining disappeared from home kitchens. Pimento cheese spread in the South. Pimento cheese was more than just an appetizer, it was a family identity. Each grandmother had her own secret ratio of ingredients that made her version the best. The base always included sharp cheddar cheese hand-shredded on a box grater, softened cream cheese, Duke's mayonnaise, and diced pimentos from a small glass jar. Some grandmothers added a pinch of cayenne pepper for heat, others mixed in a teaspoon of onion powder, and a few stirred in a splash of pickle juice for tang. The mixture was beaten by hand with a wooden spoon until creamy and spreadable. It was served in a crystal bowl with a mother-of-pearl spreader alongside saltine crackers, celery sticks, or white bread triangles. Grandmothers made fresh batches for bridge club meetings, church luncheons, and afternoon tea parties. The recipe was never measured. Everything was done by feel and taste. Mothers learned by standing beside their mothers in the kitchen, watching the exact motions and adjustments. By the 1990s, grocery stores sold pimento cheese in plastic tubs, and fewer women made it from scratch. Daughters grew up buying it pre-made and never learned the hand-shredding technique or the proper mayonnaise-to-cheese ratio. The heirloom recipe that defined Southern hospitality disappeared from family kitchens. Before we continue, cheese ball rolled in pecans no 1950s party was complete without a cheese ball sitting in the center of the appetizer table. This dish became the centerpiece of every holiday gathering, cocktail party, and family celebration. Grandmothers combined softened cream cheese with shredded sharp cheddar, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, a pinch of garlic powder, and finely chopped green onions. The mixture was shaped into a perfect ball, then rolled in chopped pecans until completely covered. Some families added pimentos, others mixed in crumbled blue cheese, and a few used walnuts instead of pecans. The cheese ball was placed on a decorative plate surrounded by Ritz crackers, wheat thins, or buttery club crackers. It was always made the night before, so the flavors could blend together in the refrigerator. Guests would spread the creamy cheese mixture onto crackers, and the bowl was always scraped clean by the end of the night. The recipe was passed down through generations, with each grandmother teaching her daughter the proper consistency and flavor balance. By the 2000s, grocery stores began selling pre-made cheese balls in plastic containers, and the homemade tradition ended. Daughters never learned how to shape the ball properly or judge the right amount of pecans. The family heirloom that once symbolized hospitality and celebration vanished from modern tables. Cocktail meatballs in grape jelly sauce. Cocktail parties in the 1950s always featured a slow cooker filled with tiny meatballs swimming in a sweet and tangy sauce. Grandmothers shaped 1 pound of ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, salt, and pepper into marble-sized meatballs. They were browned in a skillet, then transferred to a pot with a sauce made from 1 jar of grape jelly and 1 bottle of chili sauce. The mixture simmered for 1 hour, creating a glossy, sweet glaze that clung to each meatball. The dish was served in a chafing dish with toothpicks for easy eating. Guests would spear a meatball, pop it into their mouths, and return for more throughout the night. The combination of sweet jelly and tangy chili sauce was unexpectedly delicious and always sparked conversation. Grandmothers made this for cocktail parties, holiday gatherings, and bridge club meetings. The recipe was written on index cards and passed from mother to daughter. By the 1990s, frozen pre-made meatballs and jarred sauces replaced the homemade version. Daughters never learned how to roll the meatballs evenly or balance the jelly-to-chili ratio. The heirloom appetizer that once defined 1950s entertaining disappeared from family recipe boxes. 5 appetizers disappeared forever. 25 more vanished the same way. Grandmothers stopped teaching. Daughters stopped learning. Recipe cards were thrown away during kitchen renovations. The measurements existed only in memory. Nobody filmed the process. Nobody wrote it down. The appetizers died with the women who made them. Stuffed celery with cream cheese, and Olive's Bridge Club ladies in the 1950s always served stuffed celery on their best china platters. Grandmothers washed fresh celery stalks, trimmed them into 3-inch pieces, and filled each one with softened cream cheese, mixed with finely chopped green olives with pimentos. Some women added a pinch of garlic powder to the cream cheese, others mixed in Worcestershire sauce for depth, and a few sprinkled paprika on top for color. The stuffed celery was arranged in neat rows on serving trays and kept chilled until guests arrived. The combination of crisp, cold celery with creamy, tangy filling and briny olives created the perfect bite-sized snack. Grandmothers made dozens of pieces for afternoon tea parties, church socials, and holiday gatherings. The recipe was so simple that it never appeared in cookbooks. Women learned it from their mothers through observation. Mothers taught daughters how to slice the celery evenly and fill each piece without overfilling. By the 2000s, pre-packaged vegetable trays with ranch dip replaced homemade stuffed celery at parties. Younger generations never learned how to prepare fresh celery or make the olive cream cheese filling. The heirloom appetizer that once graced every Bridge Club table vanished from family traditions. Party mix, Chex Mix. Every grandmother had a huge bowl of homemade party mix, sitting out during holiday gatherings. The recipe combined 3 types of Chex cereal, rice, wheat, and corn, with pretzel sticks, mixed nuts, and bagel chips. Everything was tossed together on large baking sheets, then drizzled with melted butter mixed with Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, onion powder, and seasoned salt. The mixture was baked at 250 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour, stirred every 15 minutes to ensure even toasting. The finished party mix was crispy, savory, and addictively crunchy. Grandmothers made enormous batches and stored them in large tins, metal canisters, or glass jars for weeks of snacking. The recipe appeared in church cookbooks, junior league publications, and handwritten recipe cards across America. Mothers learned by helping their mothers stir the mixture during baking and judge the perfect golden brown color. By the 2000s, pre-made Chex Mix appeared in bags at grocery stores, and fewer women made it from scratch. Daughters grew up buying it ready-made and never learned the proper butter-to-Worcestershire ratio or the slow baking technique. The heirloom snack that once filled holiday homes with savory aromas disappeared from family traditions. 10 appetizers gone forever. 20 more vanished just as quickly. Every single one was made by grandmothers in the 1950s. Every single one disappeared by the year 2000. Recipe cards were tossed. Teaching stopped. Daughters never learned. The appetizers died with the generation that created them. Shrimp cocktail. Serving shrimp cocktail in the 1950s was the ultimate sign of elegance and sophistication at any dinner party. Grandmothers boiled fresh shrimp in salted water with lemon slices and bay leaves for exactly 3 minutes until pink and firm. The shrimp were immediately plunged into ice water to stop the cooking, then peeled and deveined by hand. They were arranged on crystal platters around a small glass bowl filled with homemade cocktail sauce made from ketchup, prepared horseradish, lemon juice, Worcestershire sauce, and a dash of hot sauce. The dish was always served ice-cold, often presented on a bed of crushed ice, to keep everything fresh throughout the party. Shrimp cocktail appeared at holiday dinners, anniversary celebrations, and special family gatherings, when grandmothers wanted to impress their guests. The recipe required careful timing. Overcooked shrimp became rubbery and inedible, while undercooked shrimp were unsafe to eat. Mothers learned by standing beside their mothers, watching the exact moment to remove the shrimp from boiling water. By the 1990s, grocery stores sold pre-cooked frozen shrimp and bottled cocktail sauce, eliminating the need for homemade preparation. Daughters never learned how to judge shrimp doneness or make cocktail sauce from scratch. The heirloom appetizer that once symbolized celebration and luxury disappeared from modern tables. Cheese straws. Southern grandmothers guarded their cheese straw recipes like family secrets, each claiming theirs were the best in town. These crispy, savory bites were made by combining sharp cheddar cheese, softened butter, all-purpose flour, cayenne pepper, and a pinch of salt into a stiff dough. The mixture was pressed through a cookie press fitted with a star-shaped disc, creating long, ridged strips that were cut into 3-inch pieces. The cheese straws were baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 minutes until golden and crisp. They were stored in airtight tins and could last for weeks, making them perfect for impromptu guests. Grandmothers made them for bridge club meetings, afternoon tea parties, church socials, and holiday gatherings. The recipe required precise measurements and a delicate hand. Too much cayenne made them too spicy, too little butter made them crumbly, and overbaking made them bitter. Mothers learned by standing beside their mothers, watching the exact moment to pull them from the oven and the proper way to press the dough through the cookie press. Some families added a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce for depth, others mixed in a pinch of garlic powder, and a few used extra sharp-aged cheddar for a stronger flavor. By the 1990s, grocery stores and mail-order catalogs sold pre-made cheese straws, and fewer women made them from scratch. Daughters never learned the proper dough consistency or the careful pressing technique. The heirloom appetizer that once defined Southern hospitality disappeared from family kitchens, and the special cookie presses were donated to thrift stores. Swedish meatballs dinner parties in the 1950s always featured a chafing dish filled with Swedish meatballs in creamy gravy. Grandmothers combined ground beef with breadcrumbs soaked in milk, finely minced onion, egg, salt, pepper, and a pinch of nutmeg. The mixture was shaped into small meatballs and browned in butter until golden on all sides. A rich gravy was made in the same pan using beef broth, heavy cream, and a flour roux, creating a smooth, velvety sauce. The meatballs simmered in the gravy for 20 minutes, absorbing all the flavors. They were served over egg noodles for dinner or kept warm in a chafing dish with toothpicks for appetizer service. The dish appeared at holiday parties, anniversary celebrations, and special family dinners. Grandmothers made the meatballs by hand, ensuring each one was perfectly round and evenly sized. Mothers learned the proper consistency of the meat mixture and the exact moment to stop browning the meatballs. By the 1990s, frozen Swedish meatballs in jarred gravy appeared in grocery stores, and the homemade tradition faded. Daughters never learned how to shape meatballs by hand or make cream gravy from scratch. The heirloom recipe that once impressed dinner guests disappeared from family kitchens. Stuffed mushrooms with cheese. Dinner parties in the 1950s always featured a platter of hot, bubbling stuffed mushrooms as the opening act. Grandmothers selected large white button mushrooms, removed the stems, and scraped out the gills to create a hollow cap. The stems were finely minced and sautéed with butter, minced garlic, and finely chopped onion until softened and fragrant. This mixture was combined with cream cheese, shredded Parmesan cheese, breadcrumbs, salt, pepper, and a splash of Worcestershire sauce. The filling was spooned into each mushroom cap, mounded high, and topped with extra Parmesan. The stuffed mushrooms were baked at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes, until the tops were golden brown and the mushrooms were tender. They were served hot on decorative platters, sometimes garnished with fresh parsley. Grandmothers made them for cocktail parties, holiday gatherings, and special family dinners. The recipe required careful preparation. Overstuffing caused the filling to spill out during baking. Underbaking left the mushrooms raw and rubbery, and overbaking made them watery and collapsed. Mothers learned by watching their mothers clean the mushrooms properly, judge the right amount of filling, and recognize the perfect golden brown color. Some families added crumbled cooked sausage to the filling, others mixed in chopped spinach, and a few topped them with crispy bacon bits. By the 1990s, frozen pre-stuffed mushrooms appeared in grocery stores, and the homemade tradition ended. Daughters never learned how to prepare fresh mushrooms or make the cream cheese filling from scratch. The heirloom appetizer that once impressed dinner guests disappeared from modern entertaining. Cocktail franks in grape jelly cocktail. Parties throughout the 1950s and 1960s featured slow cookers filled with tiny hot dogs swimming in a glossy, sweet sauce. Grandmothers combined 1 jar of grape jelly with 1 bottle of chili sauce in a large pot, whisking them together until smooth and heated through. 2 packages of beef cocktail franks were added to the bubbling sauce and simmered for 30 minutes until plump and glazed. The mixture was transferred to a chafing dish or slow cooker set on low heat, and a container of toothpicks was placed nearby for guests to spear the franks. The combination of sweet grape jelly and tangy chili sauce created an addictive flavor that kept guests returning to the table all night. Grandmothers made this for holiday parties, Super Bowl gatherings, and neighborhood potlucks. The recipe was incredibly simple. No chopping, no measuring, just 2 jars mixed together. Yet it always impressed guests who couldn't identify the secret ingredient. Mothers learned it by watching once and remembering forever. Some families used strawberry or apple jelly instead of grape. Others added a splash of bourbon for depth, and a few stirred in Dijon mustard for complexity. By the 1990s, frozen cocktail franks with sauce packets appeared in stores, and the homemade tradition faded. Daughters never learned the magic combination of grape jelly and chili sauce or experienced making the simple 2-ingredient sauce. The heirloom appetizer that sparked so many party conversations disappeared from modern gatherings. Finger sandwiches, chicken salad. Ladies' luncheons in the 1950s were incomplete without platters of chicken salad finger sandwiches arranged like works of art. Grandmothers poached a whole chicken in seasoned water with celery, onion, and bay leaves until the meat was tender and falling off the bone. The chicken was cooled, shredded by hand into small pieces, and mixed with mayonnaise, finely diced celery, salt, white pepper, and a squeeze of lemon juice. Some grandmothers added chopped pecans for crunch, others mixed in halved seedless grapes for sweetness, and a few stirred in a teaspoon of curry powder for exotic flavor. The chicken salad was spread onto thin white bread, with crusts removed, then cut into triangles, rectangles, or small circles, using biscuit cutters. The sandwiches were arranged on crystal or silver platters, covered with damp linen napkins, and refrigerated until serving time. Grandmothers made them for bridge club meetings, afternoon teas, bridal showers, and church luncheons. The recipe required careful attention. Too much mayonnaise made the filling runny and soaked through the bread, while too little made it dry and difficult to spread. Mothers learned by standing in the kitchen with their mothers, watching how to shred chicken evenly, dice celery finely, and judge the perfect moisture level. By the 1990s, grocery store delis sold pre-made chicken salad, and rotisserie chickens replaced home-poached birds. Daughters never learned how to poach a chicken properly or make chicken salad from scratch. The heirloom sandwich that once graced every elegant luncheon disappeared from family traditions. Finger sandwiches, egg salad. Afternoon tea parties and ladies' luncheons in the 1950s always featured delicate egg salad finger sandwiches arranged on tiered serving trays. Grandmothers boiled 1 dozen eggs until hard-cooked, peeled them while still warm, and chopped them finely by hand using a pastry cutter or fork. The chopped eggs were mixed with mayonnaise, yellow mustard, a splash of white vinegar, salt, white pepper, and sometimes a pinch of paprika. The mixture was spread evenly onto thin slices of white sandwich bread, with the crusts carefully trimmed off. Each sandwich was cut into 4 triangles or rectangles and arranged on silver platters lined with doilies. The sandwiches were always made fresh the morning of the event and kept refrigerated under damp tea towels to prevent the bread from drying out. Grandmothers served them at bridge club meetings, baby showers, bridal luncheons, and church socials. The recipe required perfect timing. Eggs overcooked by even 1 minute developed green rings around the yolks and tasted sulfurous. Mothers learned by watching their mothers peel eggs, chop them to the right consistency, and judge the proper mayonnaise-to-egg ratio. Some families added sweet pickle relish for sweetness, others mixed in finely minced celery for crunch, and a few stirred in a teaspoon of Dijon mustard for tang. By the 1990s, pre-made egg salad appeared in grocery store delis, and the homemade tradition faded. Daughters never learned how to boil eggs properly or trim bread crusts neatly. The heirloom tea sandwich that once symbolized elegance and refinement disappeared from modern gatherings. Hot crab dip coastal grandmothers brought their families' crab dip recipes to every celebration, each one slightly different but equally delicious. The base always started with lump crab meat, never imitation, picked clean of any shell fragments by hand. This was folded gently into softened cream cheese, mayonnaise, sour cream, lemon juice, Worcestershire sauce, Old Bay seasoning, and a pinch of cayenne pepper. Some grandmothers added grated sharp cheddar cheese, others mixed in finely minced green onions, and a few stirred in a tablespoon of prepared horseradish for heat. The mixture was spread into a shallow baking dish, topped with breadcrumbs or crushed Ritz crackers, and dotted with butter. It baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes until hot, bubbly, and golden on top. The dip was served in the same dish, kept warm on a trivet, and surrounded by crackers, toasted baguette slices, or celery sticks. Grandmothers made this for holiday parties, New Year's Eve celebrations, and special family gatherings. The recipe was expensive compared to other appetizers, so it appeared only on important occasions when grandmothers wanted to impress. Mothers learned by helping their mothers pick through crab meat for shells and judge the proper balance of cream cheese to crab. By the 1990s, imitation crab and pre-made crab dip appeared in stores, and the authentic version faded. Daughters never learned how to handle fresh crab meat or make the cream cheese base. The heirloom seafood dip that once symbolized celebration disappeared from family tables. 15 appetizers disappeared in silence. 15 more followed the same path. Grandmothers stopped hosting parties. Recipe cards were thrown in trash bags during moves. Nobody saved them. Nobody photographed them. The teaching chain broke. Mothers didn't pass them down. The appetizers vanished forever. Cucumber tea sandwiches. Afternoon tea parties in the 1950s were defined by delicate cucumber sandwiches arranged on tiered serving trays. Grandmothers peeled fresh cucumbers, sliced them paper-thin using a sharp knife or mandoline, and laid them on paper towels sprinkled with salt to draw out excess moisture for 15 minutes. Meanwhile, softened butter was whipped with fresh dill, lemon juice, and white pepper until light and fluffy. Thin slices of white bread had their crusts carefully trimmed off, then were spread with the herbed butter and layered with the drained cucumber slices. Each sandwich was cut into triangles, rectangles, or small circles and arranged on silver platters lined with lace doilies. The sandwiches were covered with damp tea towels and refrigerated until serving time to keep them fresh and prevent the bread from drying out. Grandmothers made them for bridge club meetings, baby showers, bridal luncheons, and garden parties. The recipe required precision. Cucumbers sliced too thick made the sandwiches fall apart. Too much moisture made the bread soggy, and waiting too long before serving made them limp. Mothers learned by watching their mothers slice cucumbers to translucent thinness and spread butter to the very edges of the bread. Some families added cream cheese to the butter mixture, others used watercress instead of dill, and a few added a thin layer of mayonnaise. By the 1990s, pre-made tea sandwiches appeared at catering shops, and the homemade tradition faded. Daughters never learned the proper cucumber slicing technique or the importance of salting to remove moisture. The heirloom tea sandwich disappeared from modern gatherings. Sour cream and onion dip neighborhood gatherings and backyard barbecues in the 1950s always featured a bowl of sour cream and onion dip surrounded by ridged potato chips. Grandmothers made it by mixing 2 cups of full-fat sour cream with 1 envelope of Lipton onion soup mix, a squeeze of fresh lemon juice, and sometimes a dash of Worcestershire sauce. The mixture was stirred together and refrigerated for at least 2 hours, allowing the dried onions to rehydrate and the flavors to meld into a thick, creamy dip. It was served in crystal or ceramic bowls and replenished throughout the party as guests devoured it. Grandmothers made this for casual get-togethers, football parties, and summer cookouts. The recipe was so simple that most women never wrote it down. They just knew the proportions by heart after making it a few times. Mothers learned it by mixing it once with their mothers and remembering the process forever. Some families added chopped fresh chives for color. Others mixed in crumbled bacon for richness, and a few stirred in a tablespoon of mayonnaise for extra creaminess. The dip became so popular that Lipton printed the recipe on the back of every soup mix box. By the 1990s, grocery stores sold pre-made sour cream and onion dip in plastic containers, and fewer women made it from scratch. Daughters grew up buying it ready-made and never learned the importance of refrigeration time or the proper sour cream consistency. The heirloom dip that defined casual 1950s entertaining disappeared from home kitchens. Toasted pecans. Walking into a grandmother's house in the 1950s, you'd always find a crystal bowl filled with warm, buttery toasted pecans sitting on the coffee table. These simple nuts were a staple appetizer that appeared at every gathering, from casual afternoon visits to formal dinner parties. Grandmothers made them by melting butter in a large skillet, adding raw pecan halves, and stirring constantly over medium heat until the nuts turned golden brown and fragrant. Salt was sprinkled over the hot pecans while they were still in the pan, ensuring even coating. Some grandmothers added a pinch of cayenne pepper for heat. Others used a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce for depth, and a few tossed them with brown sugar for a sweet and salty version. The toasted pecans were spread on paper towels to drain excess butter, then transferred to decorative bowls placed strategically around the house. They cost very little to make: a pound of raw pecans, a stick of butter, and salt. Yet they made guests feel immediately welcome and cared for. Grandmothers kept them in airtight tins and could pull them out at a moment's notice when unexpected company arrived. The recipe was never written down because the process was so simple: melt, stir, toast, salt, serve. Mothers learned by standing at the stove with their mothers, watching the exact moment the pecans turned from pale to golden. Waiting too long resulted in bitter, burnt nuts that had to be thrown away. The skill of toasting pecans perfectly was passed down through observation and practice. Grandmothers knew that pecans continued cooking for a few seconds after being removed from heat, so they pulled them early to prevent over-toasting. They also knew that using unsalted butter allowed better control over the final saltiness. By the 1990s, Grocery stores sold pre-roasted salted pecans in cans and bags, eliminating the need for home toasting. Daughters grew up buying them ready-made and never learned the careful stirring technique or the precise moment to remove them from heat. The special crystal bowls that once held warm, freshly toasted pecans were put away in cabinets or sold at estate sales. Ham salad ladies' luncheons and afternoon bridge clubs in the 1950s always featured bowls of creamy ham salad served with crackers or bread. Grandmothers used leftover baked ham, grinding it through a hand-crank meat grinder or chopping it finely by hand with a sharp knife. The ground ham was mixed with mayonnaise, yellow mustard, sweet pickle relish, a splash of pickle juice, and sometimes finely minced celery or onion. The mixture was beaten together until creamy and spreadable, then chilled in the refrigerator for at least 1 hour before serving. Grandmothers served it in crystal bowls with small spreaders, surrounded by saltine crackers, Ritz crackers, or sliced white bread. Some families added a pinch of paprika for color, others mixed in a teaspoon of prepared horseradish for heat, and a few stirred in hard-boiled egg for extra protein. The recipe was a practical way to use leftover holiday ham, transforming scraps into an elegant appetizer. Mothers learned by helping their mothers crank the meat grinder and judge the proper grinding texture, not too fine like paste, not too chunky like chopped ham. By the 1990s, grocery store delis sold pre-made ham salad in plastic containers, and hand-crank meat grinders disappeared from kitchens. Daughters never learned how to grind ham by hand or balance the mayonnaise to mustard ratio. The heirloom spread that once appeared at every luncheon vanished from family traditions, and the old meat grinders were thrown away or sold at estate sales. Cream cheese and olive roll UPS Bridge Club ladies in the 1950s arrived with platters of elegant cream cheese and olive roll-ups that disappeared within minutes. These simple but sophisticated appetizers required patience and a delicate hand to prepare correctly. Grandmothers started by softening blocks of cream cheese to room temperature, then beating them with a wooden spoon until smooth and spreadable. Finely chopped green olives with pimentos were mixed into the cream cheese, along with a splash of olive brine for extra flavor. Some grandmothers added a pinch of garlic powder, others mixed in dried herbs like dill or parsley, and a few stirred in finely minced green onions. Thin slices of deli ham or roast beef were laid flat on a clean work surface, and the cream cheese mixture was spread evenly over each slice from edge to edge. The meat was rolled up tightly like a jelly roll, then wrapped in plastic wrap and refrigerated for at least 2 hours to firm up. Just before serving, the rolls were sliced into half-inch rounds, revealing beautiful pinwheel patterns of pink meat, white cream cheese, and green olive flecks. The roll-ups were arranged on serving platters and speared with decorative toothpicks. The recipe required precision and planning. If the cream cheese wasn't soft enough, it tore the deli meat when spreading. If it was too soft, it oozed out the sides when rolling. The rolls had to be chilled long enough to firm up completely, or they fell apart when sliced. Grandmothers knew to use very sharp knives and wipe them clean between cuts to maintain neat, clean pinwheel shapes. Mothers learned by helping their mothers spread the cream cheese to exactly the right thickness, roll the meat tightly without squeezing out the filling, and slice the chilled rolls without crushing them. The finished roll-ups looked impressive and fancy, making them perfect for special occasions when grandmothers wanted to show their culinary skills. By the 1990s, pre-made pinwheel appetizers appeared in grocery store delis, and the homemade tradition faded. Daughters never learned the proper spreading technique, the careful rolling method, or the importance of refrigeration time. Cheese fondue dinner parties in the 1950s reached peak sophistication when the hostess brought out her special fondue pot and tiny forks. Cheese fondue became the ultimate symbol of elegant entertaining, transforming a simple meal into an interactive experience that kept guests engaged for hours. Grandmothers made authentic Swiss fondue by rubbing the inside of a ceramic fondue pot with a cut garlic clove, then heating dry white wine until it barely simmered. Shredded Gruyere and Emmental cheeses were tossed with cornstarch, then gradually added to the wine while stirring in a figure-8 pattern to prevent separation. A splash of kirsch, cherry brandy, was stirred in at the end, along with a pinch of nutmeg and white pepper. The fondue pot was placed over a small flame at the center of the table, surrounded by cubed French bread, blanched vegetables, and apple slices for dipping. Guests would spear bread or vegetables onto long fondue forks, dip them into the bubbling cheese, and twist to coat them completely. The ritual of eating fondue was just as important as the food itself. If someone dropped their bread into the pot, they had to kiss the person to their left, creating laughter and conversation throughout the meal. Grandmothers invested in complete fondue sets that included the ceramic pot, stand, burner, and color-coded forks. These sets were wedding gifts, anniversary presents, and prized possessions displayed prominently in china cabinets. Making fondue required skill and attention. If the temperature was too high, the cheese separated into a greasy mess. Too low, and it became thick and gloppy. The cheese had to be stirred constantly in the figure-8 pattern to maintain the smooth, creamy texture. Mothers learned by watching their mothers control the heat, judge the proper consistency, and rescue a fondue that started to separate by adding a splash of wine and stirring vigorously. Some families made chocolate fondue for dessert, dipping strawberries, pound cake, and marshmallows into melted chocolate. By the 1980s, fondue fell out of fashion, considered too retro and time-consuming for modern entertaining. The special fondue pots were packed away in attic boxes or donated to thrift stores. Cheese dreams. Late-night bridge club snacks in the 1950s always included a platter of hot cheese dreams fresh from the oven. Grandmothers made these by mixing shredded sharp cheddar cheese with softened butter, mayonnaise, a pinch of cayenne pepper, and sometimes a dash of Worcestershire sauce until creamy and spreadable. This mixture was spread thickly onto slices of white bread with crusts removed, then cut into triangles or squares. The cheese-topped bread was placed on baking sheets and broiled for 3 to 4 minutes until the cheese was melted, bubbly, and lightly browned on top. They were served immediately while still hot and crispy. Grandmothers made them for late-night gatherings, bridge club meetings, and casual get-togethers when guests needed a warm, savory snack. The recipe required careful attention. Cheese dreams could go from perfectly golden to burnt in seconds under the broiler. Mothers learned by standing at the oven door, watching their mothers judge the exact moment to pull them out before they turned too dark. Some families added crumbled bacon to the cheese mixture, others mixed in minced onion, and a few topped them with sliced tomatoes before broiling. The sandwiches could be prepared hours in advance and kept covered in the refrigerator, then broiled just before serving. By the 1990s, frozen cheese appetizers replaced homemade cheese dreams, and fewer women made them from scratch. Daughters never learned the proper cheese-to-butter ratio or the careful broiling technique. The heirloom snack that once kept bridge games going late into the night disappeared from family entertaining. 20 appetizers vanished completely. 10 more followed without a trace. Every recipe was homemade in the 1950s. Every recipe disappeared by 2000. Grandmothers died, taking the knowledge with them. Daughters never asked for the recipes. The teaching ended. The appetizers were lost forever. Buttered saltines. The simplest appetizers in grandmother's arsenal were often the most beloved, and buttered saltines proved that sophistication didn't require complexity. These two-ingredient wonders appeared at every casual gathering, from afternoon coffee visits to late-night card games. Grandmothers would arrange saltine crackers in a single layer on baking sheets, then brush each cracker generously with melted butter using a pastry brush. The crackers were baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 to 12 minutes until golden brown and crispy. Some grandmothers sprinkled them with garlic powder before baking. Others added dried herbs like rosemary or thyme, and a few dusted them with grated Parmesan cheese for extra flavor. The buttered saltines were served warm in baskets lined with cloth napkins, and guests would eat them by the handful. The recipe cost almost nothing, a sleeve of saltines and a stick of butter, yet they tasted rich, indulgent, and addictive. Grandmothers made them because they could be prepared in minutes, with ingredients that were always in the pantry, making them perfect for unexpected company. The crackers stayed crispy for several hours after baking, so they could be made ahead of time and set out when guests arrived. The beauty of buttered saltines lay in their versatility and simplicity, but even this basic recipe had techniques that grandmothers understood instinctively. The butter had to be melted but not too hot, or it soaked through the crackers and made them soggy instead of crispy. Each cracker needed to be brushed evenly from edge to ensure uniform browning. The baking time had to be watched carefully. 1 minute too long, and they burned around the edges, turning bitter and inedible. Grandmothers knew to rotate the baking sheets halfway through cooking to prevent uneven browning. Mothers learned by standing at the oven with their mothers, watching the exact moment the crackers turned from pale yellow to golden brown, understanding that they continued cooking for a minute after being removed from the oven. The skill of brushing butter evenly and judging perfect doneness seemed trivial, but it made the difference between mediocre crackers and irresistible ones. 25 appetizers disappeared forever. 5 more followed into extinction. Grandmothers died without teaching anyone. Recipe boxes were thrown in dumpsters during estate cleanouts. Nobody saved the cards. Nobody asked for the recipes. The final 5 appetizers vanished just as completely as the first 25. Tomato canapes. Summer gatherings in the 1950s featured platters of fresh tomato canapes that showcased seasonal produce at its peak. Grandmothers made these elegant appetizers by toasting thin slices of French bread or baguette until golden and crispy. Meanwhile, they combined softened cream cheese with mayonnaise, finely minced fresh basil or dill, a squeeze of lemon juice, salt, and white pepper. This herbed cream cheese mixture was spread onto each toasted bread slice from edge to edge. Fresh tomatoes, usually beefsteak or early girl varieties from backyard gardens, were sliced into thin rounds and patted dry with paper towels to remove excess moisture. 1 tomato slice was placed on top of each cream cheese-covered toast. Then the canapes were garnished with a tiny sprig of fresh herb, a sprinkle of paprika, or a small dollop of mayonnaise piped from a pastry bag. The finished canapes were arranged on silver or crystal platters and served immediately while the toast was still crispy and the tomatoes were cold and fresh. Grandmothers made these for summer luncheons, afternoon tea parties, and garden parties when tomatoes were at their peak ripeness and flavor. The recipe required perfect timing and couldn't be made too far in advance. If assembled more than 30 minutes before serving, the tomato juice soaked into the toast and made it soggy and unpleasant. The skill of making perfect tomato canapes lay in the details that only experienced cooks understood. The bread had to be sliced very thin. Thick slices made the canapes too heavy and bready. The toast had to be completely cooled before spreading the cream cheese, or the heat melted the cheese and made it runny. The tomatoes had to be sliced uniformly and patted completely dry. Any excess moisture meant instant sogginess. The cream cheese layer had to be thick enough to provide a barrier between the moist tomato and the crispy toast, but not so thick that it overwhelmed the fresh tomato flavor. Grandmothers knew to assemble these at the last possible moment, often setting up an assembly line in the kitchen and bringing out fresh platters throughout the party. Mothers learned by helping their mothers toast bread to the perfect golden color, spread cream cheese to exactly the right thickness, slice tomatoes uniformly, and judge the moment when assembled canapés were too old to serve. By the 1990s, catering companies made fancy canapés, and fewer women prepared fresh appetizers from scratch. Daughters never learned the careful assembly technique or the importance of timing. The heirloom summer appetizer that once celebrated fresh garden tomatoes disappeared from family entertaining. Tuna salad on crackers. Casual afternoon gatherings in the 1950s always featured a bowl of creamy tuna salad served with an assortment of crackers. Grandmothers opened cans of solid white albacore tuna packed in water, drained it thoroughly, and flaked it into a mixing bowl with a fork. Mayonnaise, finely diced celery, minced onion, a squeeze of lemon juice, salt and black pepper were mixed in until everything was well combined and creamy. Some grandmothers added sweet pickle relish for sweetness, others mixed in hard-boiled egg for extra protein, and a few stirred in a teaspoon of Dijon mustard for tang. The tuna salad was spooned into a crystal or ceramic serving bowl, placed in the center of a platter, and surrounded by saltine crackers, Ritz crackers, wheat thins, and Triscuits. Guests would spread the tuna salad onto crackers using small butter knives or spreaders. The dish was affordable, quick to prepare, and could be made hours in advance and kept refrigerated until guests arrived. Grandmothers served it at bridge club meetings, afternoon teas, and casual luncheons. The recipe was so common that most women never wrote it down. They simply knew the proportions by heart after making it dozens of times. The key to perfect tuna salad was in the details that grandmothers understood instinctively. The tuna had to be drained completely, or the salad would be watery and soak through the crackers. The celery had to be diced very finely, so it distributed evenly throughout the mixture. The onion had to be minced, not chopped, to avoid large, overpowering pieces. Mothers learned by helping their mothers drain tuna, dice celery, and judge the proper mayonnaise to tuna ratio. Too much mayonnaise made it soupy. Too little made it dry and difficult to spread. By the 1990s, grocery store delis sold pre-made tuna salad in plastic containers, and canned tuna with added mayonnaise appeared on shelves, eliminating the need to make it from scratch. Daughters grew up buying it ready-made and never learned how to flake tuna properly, dice celery finely, or balance the flavors. The heirloom tuna salad that once appeared at countless afternoon gatherings disappeared from family entertaining. Nuts and bolts snack mix holiday gatherings in the 1950s always featured enormous bowls of homemade snack mix that grandmothers called nuts and bolts because of its appearance. This savory mixture combined multiple types of cereal, rice Chex, wheat Chex, corn Chex, and Cheerios, with pretzel sticks, mixed nuts, bagel chips, and sometimes oyster crackers or goldfish crackers. Everything was spread across multiple large baking sheets and drizzled with melted butter mixed with Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, onion powder, seasoned salt, and celery salt. Grandmothers used wooden spoons to toss everything together, ensuring every piece was coated with the savory butter mixture. The pans went into a 250 degrees Fahrenheit oven for 1 hour, and grandmothers set timers to stir the mixture every 15 minutes to ensure even toasting and prevent burning. The slow, low-temperature baking dried out the cereal and nuts, making them incredibly crispy and crunchy. After baking, the mixture was spread on paper towels to cool completely, then stored in large tins, glass jars, or metal canisters. Grandmothers made enormous batches during the holidays, often tripling or quadrupling the recipe to fill multiple containers for gifts and home snacking. The recipe appeared in church cookbooks, junior league publications, and handwritten recipe cards across America. The technique for making perfect nuts and bolts required patience and attention that modern cooks often lacked. The butter Worcestershire mixture had to be drizzled evenly over all the dry ingredients, then tossed thoroughly so every piece was coated. Any dry spots would be bland and disappointing. The mixture had to be stirred every 15 minutes during the hour-long baking time. Skipping even one stirring session resulted in burnt pieces on the bottom and pale pieces on top. Grandmothers knew that the mixture seemed slightly soft when first removed from the oven, but crisped up completely as it cooled. They also knew to taste a piece after 45 minutes and adjust the baking time based on their oven's particular hotspots. The seasoning had to be balanced perfectly. Too much Worcestershire made it sour. Too much salt made it inedible. Too much garlic powder made it bitter. Mothers learned by helping their mothers measure seasonings, drizzle butter, stir during baking, and judge the perfect golden brown color. By the 2000s, grocery stores sold pre-made Chex Mix in bags, and fewer women spent an hour making it from scratch. Daughters grew up buying it ready-made and never learned the slow baking technique, the careful stirring schedule, or the proper seasoning balance. The large tins and canisters that once held homemade nuts and bolts were thrown away or repurposed. The heirloom snack mix that once filled homes with savory aromas and fed families for weeks disappeared from holiday traditions. Salmon cream cheese spread elegant luncheons, and special gatherings in the 1950s featured crystal bowls filled with pale pink salmon cream cheese spread. Grandmothers made this luxurious appetizer by draining canned pink salmon, removing any bones and skin, then flaking it finely with a fork. The salmon was mixed with softened cream cheese, mayonnaise, lemon juice, finely minced onion, a dash of Worcestershire sauce, and a pinch of cayenne pepper. Some grandmothers added prepared horseradish for heat, others mixed in chopped fresh dill for brightness, and a few stirred in capers for briny flavor. The mixture was beaten together until smooth and creamy, then spooned into serving bowls and garnished with a sprinkle of paprika, fresh dill sprigs, or thin lemon slices. The spread was served with water crackers, Melba toast, cucumber rounds, or toasted baguette slices. Grandmothers made this for bridal showers, anniversary parties, and special afternoon teas when they wanted to serve something more elevated than everyday appetizers. The recipe was more expensive than most other spreads because of the salmon, so it appeared only on important occasions. The pale pink color looked beautiful on serving tables, and the rich, savory flavor impressed guests who expected ordinary cream cheese spreads. The technique for making perfect salmon cream cheese spread required attention to detail and proper ingredient handling. The salmon had to be drained extremely well. Any excess liquid made the spread watery and thin. All bones and dark skin had to be removed carefully, because even small pieces created an unpleasant texture and appearance. The salmon had to be flaked very finely, so it distributed evenly throughout the cream cheese, without leaving large chunks. The cream cheese had to be softened to room temperature before mixing, or lumps would remain no matter how vigorously it was beaten. The spread needed to chill for at least 1 hour before serving, so the flavors could meld and the texture could firm up. Grandmothers knew that using pink salmon instead of red sockeye made the spread more delicate in both color and flavor. They also knew to taste and adjust the seasoning after chilling because cold foods needed more salt and acid than warm foods. Mothers learned by helping their mothers drain salmon, pick out bones, flake it finely, and judge the proper consistency. Thick enough to hold its shape on a cracker, but soft enough to spread easily. By the 1990s, grocery stores sold pre-made salmon spreads and smoked salmon dips, and fewer women made it from scratch. Daughters never learned how to handle canned salmon properly or balance the delicate flavors. The heirloom spread that once impressed luncheon guests disappeared from family entertaining. Ritz cracker sandwiches cocktail parties throughout the 1950s featured silver trays piled high with tiny Ritz cracker sandwiches that looked elegant but required minimal effort to prepare. Grandmothers bought boxes of Ritz crackers, the buttery, flaky kind that melted on your tongue, and paired them into matching sizes. Between each pair of crackers, they spread fillings that ranged from simple to sophisticated, depending on the occasion. The most common filling was pimento cheese, mixed with a little extra mayonnaise to make it softer and easier to spread. Other popular fillings included cream cheese mixed with chopped olives, deviled ham spread, egg salad, chicken salad, or even peanut butter for afternoon gatherings, with children present. Some grandmothers made multiple varieties and arranged them in sections on large platters, sometimes adding small labels so guests knew which filling was which. The cracker sandwiches were made several hours ahead and stored in the refrigerator, covered with damp paper towels to keep them from drying out. Just before guests arrived, the sandwiches were arranged on serving platters and brought to room temperature. The combination of buttery, crispy crackers with creamy, flavorful fillings created the perfect bite-sized snack that required no utensils and left no mess. The technique for making perfect Ritz cracker sandwiches was more involved than it seemed at first glance. The crackers had to be paired carefully by size so the sandwiches looked uniform and professional. The filling had to be spread evenly to the edges, but not so thickly that it squished out the sides when the top cracker was pressed on. If the filling was too thick, the crackers broke. Too thin, and the sandwich was dry and boring. Grandmothers knew to let the filling come to room temperature before spreading, because cold cream cheese or peanut butter was impossible to spread without breaking the delicate crackers. They also knew that certain fillings, like egg salad or tuna salad, had to be made the same day because they didn't keep well overnight. Mothers learned by helping their mothers pair crackers, spread fillings to the perfect thickness, and press the top crackers on gently without breaking them. By the 1990s, pre-made cracker sandwiches appeared in grocery store bakery departments, and fewer women made them from scratch. Daughters never learned the careful pairing technique, the proper spreading method, or which fillings worked best for make-ahead preparation. The heirloom appetizer that once impressed party guests with its elegant simplicity disappeared from family entertaining, and the special silver trays used to serve them were sold at estate sales. Vegetable relish tray. Every grandmother's party table in the 1950s featured an elaborate vegetable relish tray arranged like a work of art. These weren't simple veggie platters. They were carefully composed presentations that demonstrated the hostess's attention to detail and commitment to hospitality. Grandmothers spent hours preparing fresh vegetables into decorative shapes and arrangements. Carrots were peeled and cut into sticks, then placed in ice water with a splash of lemon juice to keep them crisp and bright orange. Celery stalks were trimmed, cut into uniform sticks, and sometimes stuffed with cream cheese or pimento cheese. Radishes were carved into roses by making small cuts around the outside and soaking them in ice water until the petals opened. Cherry tomatoes were left whole and arranged in colorful clusters. Cucumber was sliced into thick rounds or cut into sticks. Green onions were trimmed to leave some green tops. Bell peppers, red, green, and yellow, were cut into strips. Cauliflower and broccoli florets were blanched briefly to brighten their color and soften them slightly. Black and green olives filled small dishes placed around the tray. The vegetables were arranged on large crystal or silver platters in beautiful patterns, often radiating from a center bowl of dip. Common dips included French onion dip, ranch dressing, blue cheese dressing, or a simple mixture of mayonnaise and lemon juice. The art of creating a perfect vegetable relish tray was passed down through generations of women who understood that presentation was as important as flavor. Vegetables had to be cut uniformly so the tray looked professional and intentional. Everything had to be ice-cold and crispy, which meant soaking most vegetables in ice water for at least 30 minutes before arranging. The tray had to be balanced in color, texture, and height, with careful attention to creating visual interest. Grandmothers knew that radish roses required very sharp knives and a steady hand. They knew that blanching broccoli and cauliflower for exactly 30 seconds in boiling water, then plunging them into ice water, made them vibrant and easier to digest. They knew to dry every vegetable thoroughly before arranging so water didn't pool on the serving tray. Mothers learned by standing beside their mothers, watching them carve radish roses, judge the proper ice water soaking time, and arrange vegetables into beautiful patterns. By the 1990s, grocery stores sold pre-cut vegetable trays with ranch dip in plastic containers, and the art of creating relish trays disappeared. Daughters never learned how to carve radish roses, blanch vegetables properly, or arrange a tray with artistic composition. The special crystal and silver trays used for relish displays were packed away or sold. The heirloom tradition that once demonstrated a hostess's skill and care vanished from modern entertaining.
Stuffed peppers were the heirloom dinner mothers made when bell peppers were in season. Every August and September these appeared on dinner tables across America. Grandmothers taught their daughters how to make them the old-fashioned way. Large bell peppers were cut in half and seeded. The filling was made from ground beef, cooked white rice, tomato sauce, diced onions, and garlic. Everything was mixed together in a big bowl. The pepper halves were stuffed with the mixture. They were placed in a baking dish with a little water at the bottom. More tomato sauce was spooned over the tops. The dish was covered and baked at 375 degrees for 45 minutes. The peppers softened, but still held their shape. The filling was hot and savory. Families ate them with a piece of bread to soak up the extra sauce. The whole meal cost 50 cents when peppers were cheap in late summer. Every household made them at least twice a month during pepper season. Then grocery stores started selling bell peppers year-round in the 1990s. Peppers became expensive, $3 each instead of 10 cents. Families stopped making stuffed peppers. The recipes stopped being taught. Young mothers today have never made them. The heirloom dinner is gone. Nobody makes old-fashioned chicken and dumplings anymore, but every grandmother in the 1950s knew how. This heirloom dinner took 3 hours to make from scratch. A whole chicken was boiled in a big pot with water, onions, celery, and carrots. The chicken simmered for 2 hours until the meat fell off the bones. The chicken was removed and shredded by hand. The broth stayed in the pot. Then came the dumplings. Flour, baking powder, salt, and milk were mixed into a thick dough. The dough was rolled flat and cut into strips. The strips were dropped one by one into the boiling broth. They cooked for 15 minutes until puffy and tender. The shredded chicken went back in. Everything simmered together for another 10 minutes. The result was thick, creamy, and filling. The dumplings soaked up the broth like sponges. Families ate this on cold winter nights. The whole meal cost $1 and fed 8 people. Grandmothers made it every week during winter, but making it took too long. 3 hours of standing in the kitchen. Working mothers in the 1980s didn't have that time. They bought canned soup instead. The heirloom recipe died. Nobody learned how to make dumplings from scratch. That knowledge is gone forever. 5 heirloom dinners gone. Every single one fed families for decades. Every single one cost less than $1. Mothers made them without recipes. They learned by watching their mothers. Then watching stopped, teaching stopped, writing stopped. The dinners disappeared. 25 more heirloom dinners remain. Every Sunday after church, baked chicken and rice casserole was the heirloom dinner mothers served to their families. This dish came from their grandmothers who made it during the Great Depression. It used one whole chicken cut into pieces. The chicken was placed in a baking dish with uncooked white rice underneath. A can of cream of mushroom soup was mixed with water and poured over everything. Salt and pepper on top. The dish was covered with foil and baked at 350 degrees for 2 hours. The rice absorbed all the chicken juices and soup. It came out creamy and tender. The chicken fell off the bone. The whole family ate together at the table after church. This was a Sunday tradition in every household. The meal cost 75 cents and fed 6 people. Mothers made it every single week for 30 years. Then in the 1980s, families stopped going to church together. Sunday dinners stopped happening. Mothers went back to work and had no time to cook. The casserole required 2 hours in the oven. Nobody had that kind of time anymore. Fast food replaced Sunday dinners. The heirloom recipe was forgotten. Daughters never learned how their grandmothers made it. The tradition died. Many of you have been asking where to find these recipes. We've gathered hundreds of them from the Depression era through the 1970s in our cookbook, Grandma's Kitchen. Complete instructions, pro tips in 10 chapters. Link is in the description below. Now, let's get back to the video. Pan-fried beef patties with mushroom gravy fed Detroit families every Thursday night in the 1950s. This was an heirloom dinner passed from grandmother to mother for generations. The beef was ground fresh that morning from the butcher. Mothers mixed it with grated onion, ketchup, Worcestershire sauce, and breadcrumbs. They formed thick oval patties by hand. Each patty was pan-fried in butter until brown on both sides. Then came the gravy. Sliced mushrooms went into the same pan. Beef broth was poured over them. Flour got whisked in to thicken everything. The patties went back in the pan. Everything simmered together until the gravy turned rich and dark brown. The meal was served with mashed potatoes and green beans on the side. The whole dinner cost 60 cents and fed a family of 6. Every kid in the neighborhood ate this at least once a week. Their mothers all knew how to make it. Then TV dinners arrived in grocery stores in 1954. Swanson sold frozen Salisbury steak for 39 cents. It was faster and easier. Mothers stopped making patties from scratch. The recipe was never written down. When those mothers died, the heirloom dinner died with them. Nobody makes it anymore. In 1952, moist meatloaf was the most cooked heirloom dinner in America. Every Monday night grandmothers made it the same way their mothers taught them. Ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, milk, and diced onions. Ketchup on top. Baked at 350 degrees for 1 hour. The secret was using beef with 20% fat. That kept it moist and tender. Lean beef made it dry and crumbly. Grandmothers knew this by heart. They never measured anything. They just knew how much of each ingredient to add by feel. The meatloaf came out perfect every single time. It was served with mashed potatoes and corn. The whole meal cost less than $1 and fed 8 people. Leftovers made sandwiches for school lunches the next day. Cold meatloaf on white bread with mustard. Every kid ate that sandwich. Then, in the 1970s, health warnings said red meat caused heart disease. Families started eating less beef. Mothers made chicken instead. The meatloaf recipe stopped being passed down. Daughters never learned the right beef to breadcrumb ratio. They never learned how to tell when it was done just by looking. The heirloom dinner disappeared. Today, people buy frozen meatloaf from the grocery store. It tastes nothing like Grandma's. Beef stew with mashed potatoes was the heirloom dinner grandmothers made every Saturday in winter. This meal came from their great-grandmothers who cooked it in the 1800s. Beef chuck was cut into large cubes. The meat was browned in a Dutch oven with oil. Onions, carrots, celery, and garlic were added. Beef broth was poured in until everything was covered. The pot went into the oven at 275 degrees. It cooked for 4 hours, low and slow. The meat turned so tender you could cut it with a fork. The vegetables were soft and sweet. The broth thickened into gravy. While the stew cooked, potatoes were peeled and boiled. They were mashed with butter and milk until creamy. The stew was ladled into bowls. A big scoop of mashed potatoes went on top. Families ate this together on Saturday nights. The whole meal cost $1.50 and fed 8 people. The kitchen smelled amazing all afternoon. Then slow cookers were invented in the 1970s. Mothers could dump everything in and walk away. But it didn't taste the same. The meat wasn't browned at first. The vegetables were mushy. The heirloom method was abandoned. Nobody makes beef stew in the oven anymore. That technique is lost. Crispy chicken parmesan became an heirloom dinner in Italian-American homes during the 1950s. Grandmothers brought this recipe from Italy and adapted it for American kitchens. Chicken breasts were pounded thin with a meat mallet. Each piece was dredged in flour, then dipped in beaten eggs, then coated in breadcrumbs mixed with Parmesan cheese. The breaded chicken was fried in olive oil until golden brown and crispy. It was placed in a baking dish. Marinara sauce was spooned over each piece. Mozzarella cheese was layered on top. The dish went into the oven at 350 degrees for 20 minutes until the cheese melted and bubbled. The chicken stayed crispy underneath the sauce. Families served it with spaghetti on the side. The whole meal cost 90 cents and fed 6 people. This was a special Sunday dinner in Italian neighborhoods. Mothers made it for holidays and birthdays. Then in the 1990s, restaurants started selling chicken parmesan for $8 a plate. It became restaurant food instead of home food. Mothers stopped making it at home. Daughters never learned how to bread chicken properly. They never learned the trick of keeping it crispy under the sauce. The heirloom technique died. Today, people order it from Olive Garden instead. The Sloppy Joe sandwich fed every American kid in the 1950s and 1960s. This heirloom dinner was created in Iowa around 1930. By 1950, every mother knew how to make it. Ground beef was browned in a skillet with diced onions. Ketchup, brown sugar, mustard, and Worcestershire sauce were stirred in. Everything simmered for 20 minutes until thick and saucy. The mixture was scooped onto soft hamburger buns. Mothers served it with potato chips on the side. Kids ate it with their hands. The sauce dripped everywhere. That's why it was called sloppy. Every school cafeteria in America served Sloppy Joes once a week. Every kid ate them for lunch. The whole meal cost 35 cents per person. Mothers could feed a family of 6 for $2. Then in 1969, Manwich sauce was invented. It came in a can. You just mixed it with ground beef. No measuring, no mixing ingredients. It was faster and easier. Mothers stopped making Sloppy Joes from scratch. They bought cans of Manwich instead. The homemade recipe was forgotten. Daughters never learned the right ratio of ketchup to brown sugar. They never learned how long to simmer it. The heirloom version died. Today's sloppy joes taste like chemicals. This recipe came from generations of Amish grandmothers who cooked for large families working the fields. A beef chuck roast was placed in a heavy pot with just enough water to cover it. Salt and pepper went in. The pot was covered and simmered on the stove for 4 hours. Low heat. Slow cooking. The beef became so tender it fell apart when you touched it with a fork. The cooking liquid turned into rich beef broth. While the beef cooked, thick egg noodles were made from scratch. Flour, eggs, and a pinch of salt rolled out flat and cut into wide strips. The noodles were dropped into the beef broth during the last 20 minutes of cooking. They absorbed all the beefy flavor. The beef was shredded by hand right in the pot. Butter was stirred in at the end. Everything was served in deep bowls. The noodles were slippery and rich. The beef was melt-in-your-mouth tender. Farming families ate this after long days in the fields. The whole meal cost $1 and fed 10 people. It stuck to your ribs and gave you energy. The heirloom recipe stayed on the farms. City families never learned it. That knowledge didn't leave the Amish communities. Crockpot hash brown casserole became an heirloom dinner in the 1980s when slow cookers were in every American kitchen. Mothers learned this recipe from church cookbooks and passed it to their daughters. Frozen hash browns were the base. A whole bag went into the crockpot. Cream of chicken soup was mixed with sour cream and melted butter. Shredded cheddar cheese was stirred in. The mixture was poured over the hash browns. Everything was stirred together. Salt, pepper, and garlic powder were sprinkled on top. The lid went on. The crock pot cooked on low for 6 hours. By dinner time, the hash browns were soft and creamy. The mothers made it for potlucks and family gatherings. It stayed warm in the crock pot all night. Everyone went back for seconds. Every church cookbook in America had a version of this recipe. Then in the 2010s, people started avoiding processed foods. Cream of chicken soup was considered unhealthy. Frozen hash browns were too processed. Young mothers stopped making this casserole. They made fresh vegetable dishes instead. Daughters never learned the recipe. They don't own slow cookers. They use Instant Pots now. But hash brown casserole doesn't work in an Instant Pot. The texture is wrong. Tuna patties were the heirloom dinner mothers made on Fridays when Catholics couldn't eat meat. Every Friday from the 1940s through the 1970s, families ate fish. Tuna was the cheapest option. 2 cans of tuna were drained and dumped into a bowl. Mothers mixed in 1 beaten egg, crushed saltine crackers, diced onion, and a squeeze of lemon juice. The mixture was formed into flat patties by hand. Each patty was pan-fried in oil until golden brown on both sides. They were crispy on the outside and soft inside. Served with tartar sauce and a slice of lemon. Coleslaw on the side. The whole meal cost 50 cents and fed a family of 6. Every Catholic family in America ate tuna patties on Fridays. Children grew up eating them every single week. Mothers knew exactly how many crackers to add to make the patties hold together. They knew exactly how hot the oil should be. They never measured anything. They just knew by feel. The recipe was forgotten within 1 generation. Daughters never learned how to make them because they were never required to. Today, young people don't even know tuna patties exist. They think tuna only comes in sandwiches. The heirloom dinner died when the church rules changed. Nobody makes it anymore except a few old women who remember. Baked spaghetti casserole was the heirloom dinner mothers made when they needed to feed a crowd. This dish stretched 1 pound of ground beef to feed 12 people. Spaghetti was boiled and drained. Ground beef was browned with onions and garlic. A jar of marinara sauce was stirred in. The cooked spaghetti was mixed with the meat sauce in a huge baking dish. 4 kinds of cheese were layered on top: mozzarella, cheddar, Parmesan, and ricotta. The whole thing was covered with foil and baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. Then the foil came off for 10 more minutes. The cheese on top turned golden and bubbly. The edges got crispy. Families ate this at potlucks, church dinners, and family reunions. One pan fed 12 people for $3. Leftovers tasted even better the next day. Every mother knew how to make this. It was their go-to dish when company came over. Then in the 2000s, people started eating less pasta. Low-carb diets became popular. Spaghetti was considered unhealthy. Mothers stopped making casseroles. They served salads instead. The heirloom recipe disappeared. Young mothers today don't know how to make baked spaghetti. They think it's too heavy and old-fashioned. That generation is gone. Homemade lasagna was the heirloom dinner Italian grandmothers made for special occasions in the 1950s. This meal required hours of work. The meat sauce was made first. Ground beef and Italian sausage were browned together with onions and garlic. Crushed tomatoes, tomato paste, red wine, and Italian herbs were added. Lasagna noodles were boiled until barely tender. They were laid out on towels to cool. Then came the assembly. A thin layer of meat sauce went in the bottom of a deep baking dish. A layer of noodles went on top. A layer of ricotta filling was spread over the noodles. Shredded mozzarella cheese was sprinkled on. Another layer of meat sauce. The whole thing was covered with foil and baked at 350 degrees for 1 hour. Families ate this on Christmas, Easter, and birthdays. The whole pan cost $5 and fed 12 people. 15 heirloom dinners gone. Every single one took hours to make. Every single one required skills passed down through generations. Mothers taught daughters by showing them, not with written recipes. When teaching stopped, the skills died. The dinners died with them. 15 more remain. Here they are. Spanish rice with ground beef was the heirloom dinner mothers made every Tuesday night in the 1950s. This recipe came from Mexican-American grandmothers who lived in Texas and California. Ground beef was browned in a large skillet with diced onions and minced garlic. The beef was crumbled into small pieces as it cooked. Bell peppers were chopped and added to the skillet. Green peppers or red peppers, whatever was cheap that week. Uncooked white rice was stirred into the beef mixture. The rice was toasted in the beef fat until it turned golden. Canned tomatoes and tomato sauce were poured in. Chicken broth was added. Paprika, cumin, and chili powder were sprinkled on top. Everything was stirred together. The skillet was covered with a lid. The heat was turned down to low. The rice simmered for 25 minutes until tender. The liquid was absorbed. The rice was fluffy and red from the tomatoes. Families ate this with tortillas or cornbread. The whole meal cost $1 and fed 8 people. Mexican-American families made this weekly for generations. Then, in the 1980s, instant Spanish rice appeared in stores. Uncle Ben's. Rice-A-Roni. It came in a box. Nobody wanted to spend 30 minutes making it from scratch. The heirloom recipe disappeared. 10 heirloom dinners gone. Every single one fed families for decades. Every single one cost less than $1. Grandmothers made them without recipes. They learned by watching their mothers cook. Then, watching stopped. Teaching stopped. The dinners disappeared. Nobody wrote them down. 20 more heirloom dinners remain. Here they are. Classic baked ziti was the heirloom dinner Italian-American mothers made when they needed to feed a crowd cheaply. Ground beef was browned with onions and garlic. Marinara sauce was stirred in. The drained pasta was mixed with the meat sauce in a huge bowl. Ricotta cheese was dolloped throughout. Everything was dumped into a baking dish. Shredded mozzarella cheese covered the top completely. The dish was baked uncovered at 375 degrees for 30 minutes. The cheese melted and turned golden brown. The edges got crispy. The middle stayed soft and cheesy. This meal was served at church potlucks, family reunions, and funeral dinners. Daughters never learned how to make it. They don't even know what ziti pasta is. They think all pasta is spaghetti. The heirloom dinner disappeared in one generation. Spaghetti and meatballs was the heirloom dinner every Italian grandmother made from scratch in the 1950s. This meal took all day to prepare. The meatballs were made first. Ground beef was mixed with breadcrumbs soaked in milk, grated Parmesan cheese, eggs, minced garlic, and fresh parsley. The mixture was rolled into golf ball-sized meatballs by hand. Each meatball was browned in olive oil until crusty on the outside. They were set aside. Then the sauce was made. Crushed tomatoes, tomato paste, garlic, basil, and oregano went into a big pot. The browned meatballs were dropped in. The sauce simmered on the stove for 4 hours. Low heat. Constant stirring. The meatballs soaked up the tomato flavor. The sauce thickened and turned deep red. While the sauce cooked, spaghetti was boiled in salted water. It was drained and tossed with butter. The meatballs and sauce were ladled over the spaghetti. Grated Parmesan cheese was sprinkled on top. Families ate this every Sunday after church. The whole meal cost $2 and fed 10 people. Mothers could open a jar instead of simmering sauce for 4 hours. It was faster, easier. They stopped making sauce from scratch. Daughters never learned the technique. They never learned how long to simmer it. Today, people heat up jarred sauce. It tastes nothing like Grandma's. Crockpot chili was the heirloom dinner mothers made in the 1970s when slow cookers became popular. This recipe was passed down from mothers who made it on the stove in the 1950s. Ground beef was browned in a skillet with diced onions. It was drained and dumped into the crockpot. Canned kidney beans, canned diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, and tomato paste went in. Chili powder, cumin, garlic powder, and cayenne pepper were stirred in. Everything cooked on low for 8 hours. The flavors blended together. The chili thickened. By dinner time, the house smelled amazing. Families ate it with shredded cheddar cheese, sour cream, and saltine crackers. cornbread on the side. The whole pot cost $3 and fed 10 people. Leftovers tasted even better the next day. Mothers made this every week during winter. It was cheap, filling, and easy. Kids ate bowls and bowls of it. Then in the 2000s, slow cookers went out of style. Instant pots replaced them. Everything cooked in 30 minutes instead of 8 hours. But chili needs time. The flavors need to develop slowly. Instant pot chili tastes thin and watery. The meat is tough. The beans are hard. Mothers stopped making slow cooker chili. They ordered takeout instead. Daughters never learned how to make chili in a crock pot. They don't own slow cookers. They think chili only comes from Wendy's or a can. The heirloom recipe is gone. Nobody has 8 hours to let chili simmer anymore. 20 heirloom dinners lost. Every single one fed families for generations. Every single one disappeared when shortcuts replaced cooking. Canned soup replaced homemade. Frozen dinners replaced fresh. Takeout replaced kitchens. Mothers stopped teaching. Daughters stopped learning. 10 more heirloom dinners remain. These are the last ones. Double-crust chicken pot pie was the heirloom dinner grandmothers made when they needed comfort food. This dish came from England and was cooked in America since the 1700s. A whole chicken was boiled until tender. The meat was shredded by hand. The chicken broth was saved. Butter was melted in a pot. Flour was whisked in to make a roux. The chicken broth was slowly added while whisking constantly. The mixture thickened into gravy. Diced carrots, peas, celery, and potatoes were stirred in. The shredded chicken went in. Everything simmered until the vegetables were tender. Meanwhile, pie crust was made from scratch. Flour, butter, salt, and ice water mixed into dough. The dough was rolled flat. Half the dough lined the bottom of a pie dish. The chicken and vegetable mixture was poured in. The other half of the dough covered the top. The edges were crimped shut. Slits were cut in the top to let steam escape. The pie was baked at 400 degrees for 45 minutes until the crust turned golden brown. The filling bubbled out through the slits. Families ate this on cold winter nights. The whole pie cost $1.50 and fed 8 people. Grandmothers made it from memory. They never measured the ingredients for the crust. They just knew by feel. Then frozen pot pies appeared in stores. Marie Callender's, Swanson. People bought them instead. Nobody wanted to spend 3 hours making a pie from scratch. The heirloom recipe died. Young people today don't know pot pie used to be homemade. Cheesy chicken noodle casserole was the heirloom dinner mothers made when they had leftover chicken. This recipe came from grandmothers who never wasted anything. A whole chicken was roasted on Sunday for dinner. The chicken meat was shredded by hand and placed in a large bowl. Egg noodles were boiled until tender and drained. They were added to the bowl with the chicken. A can of cream of chicken soup was mixed with sour cream and milk. The mixture was poured over the chicken and noodles. Frozen peas and diced carrots were stirred in. Everything was mixed together until combined. Shredded cheddar cheese was folded in. The whole mixture was poured into a greased baking dish. More cheddar cheese was sprinkled on top. Crushed Ritz crackers were layered over the cheese. The dish was baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. The cheese melted and bubbled. The crackers turned golden brown and crispy. The inside stayed creamy and hot. Families ate this with a side salad. Homemade hamburger helper was the heirloom dinner mothers made before the boxed version existed. Ground beef was browned in a large skillet with diced onions. Garlic powder, paprika, salt, and pepper were stirred in. Beef broth and milk were poured into the skillet. Elbow macaroni was added directly to the liquid. The skillet was covered. Everything simmered for 15 minutes until the macaroni was tender. The liquid was mostly absorbed. Shredded cheddar cheese was stirred in at the end. The cheese melted into a creamy sauce. The whole meal was made in one pan. It cost $1 and fed 6 people. Kids loved it. They ate seconds and thirds. Then, in 1971, General Mills invented boxed hamburger helper. Cocktail meatballs were the heirloom dinner mothers. Ground beef was mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, minced onion, salt, and pepper. The mixture was rolled into tiny meatballs about the size of walnuts. Each meatball was browned in a skillet until crusty on all sides. They were placed in a slow cooker. The sauce was made next. Equal parts grape jelly and chili sauce were mixed together in a bowl. Calico beans were the heirloom dinner mothers made for potlucks and church suppers in the Midwest. This dish came from farm families who needed to feed large crowds cheaply. Ground beef was browned in a large pot with diced onions. Bacon was cut into pieces and fried separately until crispy. The bacon was added to the beef. Then came the beans, 3 different kinds. Pork and beans from a can. Kidney beans drained and rinsed. Butter beans drained and rinsed. All 3 went into the pot with the beef and bacon. The sauce was made next. Ketchup, brown sugar, yellow mustard, and cider vinegar were mixed together. The sauce was poured over the beans. Everything was stirred together and simmered on low heat for 1 hour. The flavors blended. The sauce thickened. The beans absorbed the sweet and tangy taste. The dish was served hot in bowls with cornbread on the side. The whole pot cost $3 and fed 20 people. Every church potluck in Iowa, Ohio, and Indiana had calico beans. Every family reunion had them. Every funeral dinner had them. Mothers made them in huge quantities. They were the perfect crowd-pleasing dish. Everyone loved them. Children ate them even though they had beans. The bacon and brown sugar made them taste good. Grandmothers passed this recipe down to their daughters verbally. They never wrote it down. Every family had slight variations. Some used more brown sugar, some added coffee or molasses. But the basic formula was always the same. Ground beef, bacon, 3 kinds of beans, and sweet tangy sauce. Then in the 2000s, potlucks became less common. People stopped going to church. Families moved away from each other. There were no more large gatherings. Mothers stopped making calico beans. Ground beef and potato casserole was the heirloom dinner British grandmothers brought to America and passed down through generations. This meal was called shepherd's pie in England. In America, it became a casserole. Ground beef was browned in a skillet with diced onions and minced garlic. Worcestershire sauce, salt, pepper, and thyme were stirred in. Frozen mixed vegetables were added: peas, carrots, and corn. Beef broth was poured in. Everything simmered for 10 minutes until thick. The mixture was spread in the bottom of a deep baking dish. Meanwhile, potatoes were peeled, boiled, and mashed with butter and milk. The mashed potatoes were spread over the beef mixture like frosting on a cake. The top was smoothed flat with a spatula. Some mothers used a fork to make decorative ridges on top. The dish was baked at 375 degrees for 30 minutes. The potatoes on top turned golden brown. The edges got crispy. The beef underneath bubbled up through the sides. The whole house smelled like comfort. Families ate this on cold winter nights. One pan fed 8 people for $2. It was filling and satisfying. Children ate every bite because they loved mashed potatoes. Even picky eaters cleaned their plates. Grandmothers made this weekly during winter months. Their daughters watched and learned. They made it for their own families. Then in the 2000s, people stopped eating heavy casserole. They wanted lighter meals. Grilled fish and quinoa replaced beef and potatoes. Young mothers considered shepherd's pie too old-fashioned and fattening. They served Mediterranean food instead. Daughters never learned how to make it. They grew up eating trendy, healthy food. They never tasted the comfort of beef and mashed potatoes baked together. Tuna noodle casserole was the heirloom dinner mothers made on Fridays in Catholic homes. This recipe became popular in the 1950s when canned soup was invented. Egg noodles were boiled and drained. 2 cans of tuna were drained and flaked. Frozen peas were thawed. Everything was mixed together in a large bowl. 2 cans of cream of mushroom soup were stirred in. Milk was added to make it creamy. The mixture was poured into a baking dish. Crushed potato chips were sprinkled on top. The dish was baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. The chips on top turned golden and crunchy. The inside stayed creamy and hot. Families ate this every Friday night. The whole casserole cost 75 cents and fed 6 people. Every Catholic mother in America knew how to make this. It was the easiest Friday dinner. No recipe needed. Just dump everything together and bake. Children grew up eating it every week. Some loved it, some hated it. But everyone ate it because it was Friday. Then in the 1970s, the Catholic Church changed the rules. Catholics didn't have to eat fish on Fridays anymore. Families stopped making tuna noodle casserole. They made hamburgers instead. The recipe disappeared within 1 generation. Young mothers today have never made it. They don't know what it is. They think tuna only goes in sandwiches. The heirloom dinner died when the church rules changed. A few old women still make it. But their daughters never learned. When those women die, the recipe dies with them. Ground beef casserole was the heirloom dinner mothers made when they needed to clean out the refrigerator. This dish had no specific recipe. Every family made it differently. The basic formula was ground beef plus vegetables plus starch plus cheese. Ground beef was browned in a skillet. Whatever vegetables were in the refrigerator got chopped and added. Onions, peppers, celery, carrots, zucchini, mushrooms, anything worked. Whatever starch was in the pantry went in next. Egg noodles, rice, potatoes, or macaroni. A can of tomato soup or a cream of mushroom soup was stirred in for sauce. Everything was mixed together and dumped into a baking dish. Shredded cheese covered the top. The casserole was baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes. The result was different every time depending on what vegetables and starch were used. It always tasted good. The cheese melted and bubbled. The beef was savory. The vegetables were tender. Families ate it with bread to soak up the sauce. The whole casserole cost about $2 and fed 10 people. Mothers made this at least once a week. It was the ultimate leftover meal. Nothing went to waste. Whatever was about to go bad in the refrigerator went into the casserole. Children never complained because it was smothered in cheese. Everyone ate it happily. Grandmothers passed this technique down to their daughters. They didn't give them a written recipe. They just showed them how to throw things together, how to eyeball the proportions. R.E. Hook. 25 heirloom dinners lost forever. Every single one fed families for generations. Every single one disappeared when convenience replaced cooking. Shortcuts replaced skills. Recipes replaced instinct. Young mothers stopped watching their mothers cook. They stopped learning by doing. 5 more heirloom dinners remain. These are the final ones. Beef and macaroni skillet was the heirloom dinner mothers made before hamburger helper existed. In the 1950s, this was called American goulash. It had nothing to do with Hungarian goulash. It was completely American. Ground beef was browned in a large cast iron skillet with diced onions and minced garlic. Salt, pepper, and paprika were stirred in. A can of tomato sauce was poured in. A can of diced tomatoes went in next. Beef broth was added. Everything was stirred together and brought to a boil. Elbow macaroni was added directly to the skillet. Liquid barely covered the pasta. Skillet was covered with a lid. The heat was reduced to a simmer. The macaroni cooked for 15 minutes in the tomato and beef mixture. It absorbed all the flavors. The liquid was mostly absorbed by the time the pasta was tender. The dish was thick and saucy. Shredded cheddar cheese was stirred in at the end. The cheese melted into everything. The whole meal was made in one skillet, no separate pot for boiling pasta. It cost $1.50 and fed 8 people. Mothers made this at least twice a week. It was fast, easy, and filling. Children loved it. They ate huge portions. The dish stuck to your ribs. You stayed full for hours. Grandmothers taught their daughters how to make it. The key was not using too much liquid. If you added too much, the pasta would be soupy. You wanted it thick and saucy. That technique was learned by watching, not from a recipe. Then in 1971, hamburger helper was invented. It came in a box with dried pasta and powdered sauce. You just added ground beef and water. It was even easier than making it from scratch. Mothers started buying boxes instead. The homemade version was forgotten. Daughters never learned how to make it. They grew up eating the boxed version. They think that's how it's supposed to taste. They don't know the homemade version tastes better. Real tomatoes instead of powder. Real cheese instead of chemicals. The heirloom recipe died when the convenience version appeared. Cheeseburger pie was the heirloom dinner mothers made. Ground beef was browned in a skillet with diced onions. Worcestershire sauce, salt, and pepper were stirred in. The beef was drained and placed in the bottom of a pie dish. Shredded cheddar cheese was sprinkled over the meat. In a separate bowl, Biscuit baking mix was whisked with eggs and milk. The mixture turned into a thin batter. The whole thing was baked at 400 degrees for 30 minutes. The crust looked like a biscuit. The inside stayed moist with melted cheese and beef. When you cut into it, the layers were visible. Children loved it because it tasted like fast food but was homemade. It felt special. Every bite reminded you of McDonald's. Then, in the 1990s, people started eating healthier. Ground beef was considered unhealthy. Biscuit was processed. Cheese was full of fat. Health-conscious mothers stopped making cheeseburger pie. They made grilled chicken and vegetables instead. Daughters never learned the recipe. They grew up eating lean proteins and salads. They never tasted cheeseburger pie. Today, young mothers have never heard of it. They think it sounds disgusting. They can't imagine mixing a cheeseburger with pie crust, but it actually tastes amazing. The Biscuit forms a fluffy biscuit layer that soaks up the beef juices. The cheese melts into everything. It's comfort food at its best. The heirloom recipe died when people became obsessed with healthy eating. Nobody makes it anymore. Old women who remember it say their daughters missed out on something special. But their daughters don't believe them. They think grandma's food was gross. Haystacks were the heirloom dinner families made at potlucks and youth group gatherings from the 1950s through the 1990s across America. This meal was not really a recipe with precise measurements. It was a format, a system where everyone built their own plate exactly how they wanted it. The base was always tortilla chips or crushed saltine crackers spread across your plate in a thick layer. Some families used white rice as the foundation instead. Then came the toppings piled on one by one. Ground beef seasoned with taco seasoning was always the first layer. The seasoned beef was browned in a large skillet and kept warm in a slow cooker. It was scooped generously over the chips or rice. Then you moved down the topping bar and added whatever you wanted from dozens of options. Shredded iceberg lettuce went on next, diced fresh tomatoes, shredded cheddar cheese, dollops of sour cream, salsa from a jar, sliced black olives from a can, diced white onions, refried beans warmed in a pot. Some families offered kidney beans, corn, jalapenos, or guacamole. Everyone made their plate completely different based on personal preferences. The toppings were piled high into a massive mound. That is why it was called a haystack, because it looked like a big pile of hay sitting on your plate. You ate it with a fork, cutting through all the layers at once. The chips got soggy quickly from the hot beef and wet toppings. Some people loved the soggy texture, others hated it and ate fast before everything turned mushy. But everyone ate it regardless because building your own plate was fun and exciting. The entire meal cost about $3 to feed 20 people, making it perfect for church potlucks and youth group dinners where budgets were tight. Everyone could customize their haystack exactly how they liked it. Picky eaters could skip toppings they hated. Adventurous eaters could pile everything on. It was interactive and engaging. Kids loved competing to see who could build the tallest haystack without it collapsing. They piled their plates absurdly high with cheese and sour cream. Mothers made haystacks for decades because it was incredibly easy. You just browned ground beef and set out bowls of toppings. No complicated cooking techniques required. Hamburger soup was the heirloom dinner mothers made when they needed to stretch 1 pound of ground beef to feed 10 people during tight weeks. This soup came directly from Depression-era grandmothers who mastered the art of making a little bit of meat go a long way without anyone leaving the table hungry. Mothers browned ground beef in a large pot with diced onions and minced garlic over medium-high heat. They crumbled the beef into very small pieces as it cooked, breaking it apart with a wooden spoon. Each piece was no bigger than a pea, so the meat stretched further and distributed evenly throughout the soup. After the beef browned completely, they poured in 8 cups of beef broth. Canned diced tomatoes went in next, along with tomato sauce for thickness and richness. Then came the vegetables, whatever was cheap that week at the grocery store. Diced potatoes, sliced carrots, chopped celery, and frozen green beans all went into the pot. Everything simmered together, uncovered, for 1 full hour. The potatoes became fork tender. The carrots softened perfectly. The flavors blended into a rich, beefy soup that tasted like it had simmered all day. Some mothers added pearl barley or white rice to make the soup even heartier and more filling. Dried herbs like oregano, basil, and bay leaves were thrown in for flavor. Salt and black pepper were added to taste. The finished soup was ladled into bowls and served steaming hot with saltine crackers on the side. The whole pot cost $2 in ingredients and fed 12 people easily. It was incredibly filling and satisfying. 2 bowls and you were completely stuffed. Mothers made this soup every week during winter months. It was their go-to-cheap dinner when money was tight. Children ate it without complaining because the broth was flavorful, the vegetables were soft, and the beef added just enough meaty flavor without being overwhelming. Grandmothers passed this recipe down by showing their daughters how to make it in their own kitchens. They never measured anything with cups or spoons. They just knew instinctively how much of each ingredient to add by sight and experience. They knew by looking and smelling when the soup reached perfection. This knowledge came from making the soup hundreds of times over decades. Creamy chicken spaghetti bake was the heirloom dinner Italian-American grandmothers made when they had leftover chicken from Sunday roast. This dish was called chicken tetrazzini in fancy restaurants, but at home it was just chicken spaghetti, the meal that appeared every Monday night without fail. Grandmothers boiled spaghetti in salted water until tender and drained it in a colander. They melted butter in a large pot over medium heat. They whisked flour into the melted butter to create a roux, stirring constantly for 2 minutes until it smelled nutty. They slowly poured in chicken broth while whisking continuously so no lumps formed. They added heavy cream and kept whisking. The mixture thickened into a smooth, creamy sauce that coated the back of a spoon. They stirred in sliced mushrooms that had been sautéed until golden. They added minced garlic and black pepper. They folded in shredded cooked chicken torn into bite-sized pieces. The drained spaghetti went into the pot next. Everything was tossed together until every strand was coated in creamy sauce. Grated Parmesan cheese was folded in, melting slightly from the heat. The whole mixture was poured into a greased 13 by 9-inch baking dish. More Parmesan cheese was sprinkled generously across the top. Buttered breadcrumbs were scattered over the cheese for crunch. The dish baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the top turned golden brown and crispy, while the inside stayed creamy and bubbling. This dinner was served at special occasions, holidays, birthdays, and Sunday dinners after church. The whole dish cost $3 and fed 10 people. It felt fancy even though it was made from leftovers. The creamy sauce made it special. 30 heirloom dinners gone. Every single one fed families for generations. Every single one cost less than $2. Grandmothers made them without recipes. They learned by watching their mothers cook. They measured nothing. They timed nothing. They just knew. That knowledge came from making the same meals hundreds of times, from muscle memory, from instinct. Then everything changed. Daughters stopped watching. They got busy. They got jobs. They had no time to stand in the kitchen for hours. Convenience foods appeared in stores, frozen dinners.
These were the 60 forgotten heirloom meals that vanished from American kitchen history between 1950 and 1959. Mothers cooked them every single week. Families gathered around dinner tables at 6 o'clock sharp and ate together before television changed everything. Children grew up tasting these flavors, learning these traditions, watching their mothers work in kitchens that smelled like browning ground beef and baking casseroles, and Sunday suppers that took all afternoon to prepare. Then convenience culture arrived. Frozen dinners replaced homemade cooking. Fast food restaurants replaced family tables. An entire generation of recipes disappeared within 20 years, and nobody wrote them down because mothers assumed their daughters would learn by watching. But the daughters got jobs outside the home, and the watching never happened. And now these 60 meals exist only in senior citizens' memories. If you loved seeing these forgotten recipes again, please make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with that one person you want to recreate these memories with. Let's bring these meals back together.